Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
All live around the world on the internet at MichaelDukesShow.com and across the great state of Alaska. This is your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Hello, my friends. How are you? Welcome to hour one of the big radio show for this hump day. Yeah, that's right. We're middle of the week, downhill slide to Firearms Friday. This week on Firearms Friday, Dr. John Lott will be joining us, so that'll be fun. I'll also be in Fairbanks on Friday for the Open North American Sled Dog Championships, which is it's like the Iditarod for drag racing. It's like dog drag racing because it's the fast race, right? That's what's happening. The fastest sled dogs in the world. So that's going to be going on all weekend in Fairbanks, and I'll be broadcasting on KFAR up in Fairbanks for all of that this weekend, which also means, headline, I will not be here on Monday. Monday will be the show will be off because I will be in the air. I'll actually be flying during the show on Monday because I'm not going to drive all the way up to Fairbanks and back in the same. Dog races don't even get over until 4 p.m. or something. So anyway, next Monday I will be off the air. And you'll have alternate programming, and then we'll be back on Tuesday. So just a housekeeping measure. It's just, I'm just letting you know that's how it is. Today's program, we got a lot lined up. Senator Mike Shower joins us in hour two for the Shower Hour of Power. In hour one, we're going to get right into it. A guy who's been asking a lot of hard questions, and I think deservedly so. He and I have not always agreed on everything, but he and I agree 100% on this one. How do we pay for all of this stuff that they want to keep putting in there? I mean, I think it's a valid question, and he's been holding their feet to the fire, which I have appreciated. State Representative Will Stapp from the Interior joins us this morning to discuss this and more. Good morning, Will. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing good, Michael. How are you doing?
You know, it's another beautiful day here in paradise down in beautiful Homer, Alaska. I guess you guys staying warm in Juneau and everything else. So appreciate you coming on board and talking with us today. This has been this has been an interesting session. And I knew it was going to be based on what we were seeing in the election cycle, where there was a lot of a chicken in every pot speech going on across the state, right? Oh, we'll give you get a couch and you get a chicken and you get a moose in your oven and of course we could all see what was happening, the handwriting on the wall, which was the fact that the state is effectively broke. Okay. I mean, we're effectively deficit spend. I mean, we're not broke. We just are not great with money because we keep spending more than we take in. And it can't go on forever. So why don't you walk us through? It's been quite a while since we had you on the program. So why don't you walk us through what the beginning of the session looked like for you, and then this discussion on HB 69 and what was eventually your breaking point on this whole thing as you look at this. So why don't you start us off there?
Yeah, well, for starters, it's good to be here as always. And, it's easy to promise chicken in every pot until you run out of chickens. And it's kind of hard to do that, but to me, I would say it was pretty clear in my mind kind of how the session would go. So basically, I looked at my friends and colleagues in the House majority, which is, of course, predominantly a Democrat majority with a couple of Republicans, and they have independents in their coalition, And they said three things. One, they were going to spend a bunch of money. Two, they weren't interested in taxes. And three, I think that was, we're going to spend a bunch of money too. So the problem with those things is, you don't have the money, right? And I think in our state budget, I wouldn't say that the state's broke. I said we're probably the richest broke person you've ever met, depending on how you view the problem. But look, fundamentally, those things don't measure up at the end of the day, right? So the issue with the spending and the not having the money is, at the end of the day, the only real responsibility you have as a legislator is to pass a budget that is balanced with appropriate funding sources, right? i.e. it's a funded budget. And in order to do that type of thing, you have to be very mindful of, let's call it, very obvious and known expenditures, and also potential risk, kind of like you would do in any other type of environment, if you were even your own household budget or your own business budget, right? So I come from the business world. I worked in insurance forever. And I tell folks, different quarters in my life produce different revenues, right? I did better in certain quarters of the year than I did other quarters of the year.
Right.
So in Alaska is not that different, depending on, because we're very reliant on investment income and, of course, oil price, right? So say what you want about President Trump, he has never been good for high oil prices. So I doubt that he will continue to not be good for high oil prices. So,
right. Well, that's always been the balancing act here in the state, is that since we are a resource-based, or have been historically, until the last handful of years, we've been mostly a resource-based economy. That's kind of been the problem, is that we've watched the revenue run from one side of the boat to the other, bumper crops to famine, feast to famine, back and forth as the market, because we're suffering the vagaries of the market. And you're right. Anytime, overall, the idea that, we're going to strive for energy independence as a nation is great for the nation, good overall, and good for the consumer, not necessarily good for the state revenue coffers. And it's kind of that same dichotomy here in the state. Good for the state citizens because the cost of heating oil and fuel and stuff like that drop. Not great for the state, and vice versa. When it was a bumper crop for the state, people are struggling to fill their heating oil tanks and put gas in their cars and things like that. So it's been a very troubling time. And now that we rely so heavily on our investments in the permanent fund and the earnings of that, now we're also suffering the vagaries of the market on top of that, and mismanagement of the permanent fund, in my opinion, as well. And so we're kind of double troubling it. But again, the problem here is, Will, we've known this is coming. I mean, if you've been looking at the governor's 10-year forecast for the last 4 or 5 years, you could see that this is what was shaping up on the horizon. And yet it's just this year that some of these legislators are like, we have a problem. I mean, this has been coming, right? This has been building. This has been very visible on the horizon. The bridge is out. We should have been applying the brakes on the train a couple of years ago.
Yeah. And keep in mind, even on the 10-year forecast, Michael, the assumptions are always steady. So, for example, the assumptions on oil price in the 10-year forecast is like always $70 a barrel. The production assumption is always what our assumptions are. And the investment returns are always, the targeted average, right?
Well, and the spending always remains flat, pretty much, in your forecast. It's always a very rosy spending plan.
Yeah. So, as you know, all three of those things are not true, right? So, the problem really is insulating you from what we call financial risk. So you bring up a really good point, which is investment returns are subject to market performance, and taxation on oil is subject to price and production. So that means, you have a potential kind of, let's call it Armageddon scenario, where your stock market starts dropping like a hot rock and your oil price drops, right? And just so people understand what that means in terms of overall revenue, $1 per barrel in oil price is around $40 million in revenue for the state. So if you were to drop, if oil prices were to go from $73 to $63, the state would lose $400+ million in revenue in a single fiscal year. All right. So what does that mean in terms of raw numbers? The last year, the Republican House majority, we paid out a dividend around $1,400. That's close to $1 billion in overall thing. That's how much that is in terms of real dollars. This year, the Democrat-led coalition majority will be substantially less than that because they are planning to probably spend that on other things, although we'll find that at the House Finance Committee as we go through the budget. But just know that that amount of money will disappear rapidly in the event that a couple of those metrics change.
Well, and that's the bigger part of the problem here. I mean, we're talking about the only available pot of money right now that everybody seems to be willing to spend, because the majority certainly doesn't want to go to the CBR, the Constitutional Budget Reserve, because first of all, there's only just under $2 billion in there now. So it's been slowly building up, but there's not a lot of money left in there. Secondly, it requires a supermajority vote, which would require the cooperation of the minority. And they don't want the minority to have a say in anything, because the minority would have conditions. If you want our vote on this, then you've got to do certain things. They don't want that at all. They want to shut you guys out. And that means the only available pot of money readily available by a simple majority vote is the permanent fund itself. And the problem with that is that's a self-licking ice cream cone, because once you hit zero, once you go from 75-25 to 82-18 to 90-10 to pretty much all of a sudden there's no money left. Once that's done, you have no other choice. There will be some form of taxation in this state, because they'll look at you and go, well, we certainly couldn't cut anymore. So free rides die hard, baby. Time for you to pay up, right? Time for you to pay your fair share, Alaska, never discounting the fact that they're spending $2 billion of our fair share by taking the entire dividend to begin with.
Yeah. And so, again, let's just kind of contextualize that, because, again, it's a really, really important point. These types of things can kind of go off the rails very quickly, right? And so the worst thing that you can do in an area of uncertainty is you have to plan for contingencies, because if you start adding fixed liabilities to your budget and then the bottom falls out, now you have big red numbers, which we are seeing a lot of big red numbers in the Finance Committee. In terms of the CBR, I mean, House Republicans worked really hard filling that balance back up, Michael. I didn't get a lot of notice in the media, but the CBR balance is closer to $3 billion now. And when I got in office, it was closer to what, right? And that might not seem like a big deal, but it is a big deal, right? Because I don't think we've replenished the balance any years prior to that.
And let me interrupt you for just a second, and I apologize, but I think people have to realize we owe the CBR money, because there's a constitutional mandate to have a $10 billion balance in there. Mm-hmm. We spent that down to less than $1 billion. It was less than, I think it was 600 million or something. So we owed that nearly $10 billion, and that's been pretty much ignored by most of the legislature. And, yes, putting money back in there is important, and living within our means is important, but that's it. That's a huge thing that we owe that money. We have to pay it back.
And to finish that point, I mean, we haven't really discussed it amongst ourselves, but I can't imagine that many of us in the Republican caucus would be willing to tap the CBR after we work very hard to start refilling balance, if that makes sense.
Right. No, I mean, I think that's and it's a good thing, and I'm glad to see that we're at least considering it and factoring it in. We're talking with Representative Will Stapp here from the Interior, and we're going to continue here in just a moment. When we get back, we're going to talk about some of the interesting things, including that immediate move by Will to roll the education bill right out of finance shortly after it got started in discussions, and your commentary on it, Will, which I thought was amazingly insightful for many of these folks who just don't seem to be getting it as to what's going on out there. So we're going to continue here in just a minute with Will Stapp. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We return with more in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Will Stapp is our guest here on the program. Kevin McCabe just said in the chat room, he said, we can't talk about the PFD without getting Louise's permission first. Really?
Yeah. That was a funny moment on the floor, So
explain that to me.
Yeah, so Rep Frank Tomaszewski, my colleague from Fairbanks, was talking, basically having amendment. So I went through the how you pay for it amendment. And I told them that they would need taxes to pay for the bill. That got voted down horrifically on the floor because, we try to promise things we don't have a funding source for. And then my colleague Frank went in and he had an amendment basically to say, okay, well, you say you're not going to use taxes to pay for this, and this amendment says you can't use the earnings account to pay for this, basically from the dividend, right? And they gave him a real hard time by saying the PFD, even though his amendment referenced the earnings account, which of course the PFD comes from. So he was instructed that he couldn't talk about the PFD, even though his amendment was referenced earnings. So that was a really interesting thing. Clearly, people didn't want to talk about the funding source, which will be the PFD if you don't have taxes. That's how that works down here, folks, just so everybody understands. And that's not a new thing. Last year at the House Finance table, I got a little grief on the show here because I was trying to explain to my colleagues again that we didn't have a lot of money, and the minority at that time kept trying to spend money. So what I would do is every time they tried to spend money, I would amend their amendment to cut the PFD down by the exact amount they wanted to spend. And then they would withdraw their spending amendment, right?
Right.
I would tell them that, hey, look, if you want to tell the voters of the state that you want to spend $5 million on underwater basket root weaving, you should tell them that you're going to take it at $11 out of the PFD to do that, right? So.
Right. No. And that's, it's actually in hindsight, that was actually a kind of a brilliant maneuver because, again, you're showing people exactly how this is being paid for. And that's been the question that we've been asking on the program for years. How do you pay for all this? And more importantly, in some ways, who is actually paying? Because there are people out there who are financially viable and the dividend doesn't mean a thing to them. And yet there's Alaskans out there who depend on a big chunk of that PFD to get them through the year. Every year. And so who's paying and who's disproportionately paying more as a portion of their annual salary or their income and things like that. So who, how do you pay for it and who pays are two of the biggest questions that I think we should be asking ourselves as citizens and asking our legislators, and that you legislators should be asking each other. And you're really been one of the very few out there who's been asking that question. They just seem to think like the look going in seems to look a lot like they just like, it's going to be there. We're too big to fail. Don't worry. It's always going to be there. Am I wrong? Or is that just kind of the reaction that a lot of these people, especially the majority, are having?
No, you're not wrong. And it's actually probably worse than your assumptions are. So, there's a lot of, let's call it like budget kabuki in our budget, right? So first, let me say, what I know is, I represent East Fairbanks, Fort Wainwright, and Badger. Some of my voters are, in the chat room right now, and they listen. And I know that my expectations as a legislature are, when I come down here to Juneau, my responsibility is to find things that government spends money on that are wasteful, cut them. If they're inefficient, change them. And if they're necessary, advocate for them, right? It's a pretty clear message for me. People that elect me and that I represent don't like politicians and government wasting money. And especially when they know that it is directly tied to their permanent fund dividend, right? So I would always encourage people when you hear the words like, oh, we don't have the money and we got to do this and do that, I would just ask them how many of their elected officials who tell them that actually understand their budget, right?
Right. No, exactly. I agree with that. And these are the questions that we need to be asking, because we cannot continue mathematically, just through sheer arithmetic, we cannot continue the way we're going right now and expect that it's all going to work out swimmingly at this point. All right. We're 8 seconds out from rejoining the radio. Folks, if you do me a favor, please like and share. There's 60 of us here in all the chat rooms and everything, and only 12 of you have liked the show. What's the matter with you? Don't you like me? Don't you like Will? Like it.
Not always.
Public enema number one. Oh, wait, sorry. Public enemy number one, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke show.
Yes, I'm a pain in the something or other. Not nearly as much as a pain as Rep Will Stapp, apparently, though, for the Finance Committee. He's been doing some yeoman's work in there. And I want to talk a little bit about this. Will, this HB 69 got introduced really early. It was the first piece of legislation everybody wanted to take up. They wanted to get it out of the way. The Democrats were having a hard time in the Education Committee because they were missing a member and they couldn't get stuff. So they actually rolled it out through from the floor. They Rule 49'd it and got it out there, which immediately sent it into Finance. But surprise, surprise, it went into Finance and it wasn't in there, 30 minutes into its first hearing? And Representative Will Stapp said, well, you know what? I'm tired of all this talking back and forth because nobody's talking about how to pay for it. So we move it out of the committee. And you could have heard a pin drop in there when you did that. And that was all because why? You wanted to find out how we're going to pay for it?
Yeah, I mean, it was 37 minutes to give the Finance Committee credit, Michael. We did bet it for an extra 7 minutes, but it's a really simple bill. So how did this start? So HB 69, first the majority, again, good people, they mean well. They want to have stable and reliable funding for education. I actually agree with that underlying principle. But they rolled out a bill and they put it in a policy committee. And then they initially said they didn't want any policy in it, put in the policy committee, right? They just wanted a funding bill. Okay, that's fine. So we had...
Shut up and give us our money. Shut up and give us our money. We'll talk about policy later.
Yeah, right. So we had some of our members in the policy committee. They debated things, and they had a few amendments, and they offered one, and it failed, and there wasn't much discussion. So they're like, okay. And then the bill sat there for a while, right? Because they had a missing member, and then the majority leader went on and went to discharge it on the House floor. And I told some of my colleagues in the majority, I said, hey, if you guys wanted the bill out of the committee, you should have just asked. I would have discharged it for you, And, but they didn't. So they just did it themselves and they brought it to the Finance Committee. And remember, it's strictly a money bill at this point. And when you're dealing with the money bill, that's a pretty easy thing to do because the first question you ask is if you actually have the money, right? And if you don't have the money, which, the bill, depending on how you want to count the numbers, the first 3 years were $1.5 billion, roughly, nearly a little bit under. And then it kind of ballooned to an actual $1 billion new liability index to inflation payment, by the end of the decade, right? So the problem is I don't have $1.5 billion, right? And by the way, what's left of your PFD isn't $1.5 billion either. It's substantially less than that, just so people understand. So there was actually no legitimate way to fund that bill reliably. And keep in mind, the whole point of permanent education funding in law is stable and reliable funding, right? So if the argument is I'm making a promise to our great educators and kids and parents in the state that I'm going to provide X amount of dollars, well, if you're going to make that promise, you have to actually make that reliably on a funding source that is going to be available to pay for the bill. So we didn't have that. They wanted the bill. When I asked them the question twice, actually on the record, nobody could articulate to me how we were going to pay for it. I did hear the answer, we'll have to just figure that out at some point. So I said, okay, well, here's your bill. Tell me how to figure it out. And then we moved it out of the committee. And then it went to the Rules Committee. And then they changed it substantially in the Rules Committee, almost like they understood that they didn't actually have the money to pay for it. But, they just changed it to another bill they don't have the money to pay for, right? So now right. The choice was one mega unaffordable bill to a less unaffordable bill. By the way, this new bill is a lot more reasonable. But at the end of the day, it's over $250 million, although there is actually no new fiscal note on HB 69 rules version yet, just to let everybody know, even though we're going to pass it today, but there is no new fiscal note.
Right.
So the question is, like, if you're going to make a promise to, schools, districts in the state that you're going to guarantee them X amount of dollars, then you need to be able to do that with a reliable funding mechanism. And right now, I can't guarantee anybody reliably and confidently that I can spend another $250+ million on education forever.
And what kind of deficit does that leave us with right now? Because I think people need to understand two things. One, we're in a deficit for next fiscal year, which is the year that you guys are discussing right now at the legislative level.
Mm-hmm.
But that we still have a deficit for this year, this fiscal year that we're in, that's going to end in June. We have $150, $160 million deficit this year as well. So what if we go ahead and fund this $1,000 BSA, $250 million, $260 million? What does that leave us with as far as deficits going into the next year? And where would we cut, where would the money come from?
All right. This is an excellent thing to get into. I'm going to be a little detailed here, Michael, so forgive me if I give too much detail. Okay?
No. We like getting down in the weeds.
Yeah. Okay. So, overall, the total deficit, if we were just to do, remember the state does, we do a baseline budgeting, which means that we take what we did last year, which we can get into why that's going to be a big problem here soon anyways. So if you just did what we did last year, you're going to be looking around a $200 million deficit without doing anything. If you add the new spending in, you're around $300 million. If you add this bill, you're around $600 million deficit, right? So keep in mind, the permanent fund dividend is around the appropriation last year is around $900 million. Okay. So if you want to take that all and you want to cut the PFD down, what PFD are you actually going to look at in the event that you were just to do that? And that's going to drop that thing all the way down to $600-ish. But the problem is, even at that level, if you're just cutting the PFD, you're not actually accounting for all the spending items. So the current proposal in the budget doesn't really account for the amount of money we will spend on contract negotiations. It doesn't account for any bills passing. It doesn't account for fixed costs like disaster capitalization or fire service. It doesn't account for lots of other things, but it also doesn't account for fluctuating revenue streams. And there's no capital budget, right? So keep in mind, there's currently no capital budget space in the House, all right? And all of those things, there's some things that government does that are kind of important, and there's a lot of things government does that are not important, right? But, I would argue that, making sure that Dalton Highway stays open is kind of important to people in the state. Kind of a big deal. We should probably have a Dalton Highway so we can have oil and gas development, so we can actually have money to spend at the
right.
Right. So
that's a radical theory there. That's radical.
Yeah. So when you look at prioritizing things, you should look at the Dalton Highway and be like, yeah, I probably need that one. Lots of other things I don't need, but kind of need that one. But the real issue is kind of the shell game that's happening with what's called the lapse report and vacancies. So we've talked about this in depth. Ben Carpenter talked about it when he's been on the show. I've talked about vacancies. And just so the people of the show understand, the thing that looks to be happening, and we'll get into this on the finance table, is the state budgets, let's say 92% of payroll, right? We have an 8% what's called vacancy factor, roughly, right? And let's say our vacant positions are around 15%, right? So we're over budgeting for payroll by around 6% of the total costs. So let's just make the math super easy, right? Let's say that we're over budgeting, $250 million. That's in theory what should lapse into our reserve funds and then go back into the CBR, okay? And the reason that should happen is because They're not actually hiring all the people they're budgeted to hire above the base factor. Okay.
Right.
So that money flows like a river into like capitalizing different accounts for Alaska Care, and then it goes into the Constitutional Budget Reserve. That's how we in the Republican majority were able to rebuild that Constitutional Budget Reserve balance, because that's how that money is supposed to flow. The problem is when you look at the current lapse report, the vacancies are still fairly high. They're better than they were the last 2 years, but they're still substantially above that 8% factor. But there's not any money in the lapse report, i.e., the last report I looked at had like $30 million. Okay. So if I'm supposed to lapse $200 million and I'm only lapsing $30 million, that's a big problem, because where's that money going? Okay. So that's money that's in the personnel services line, and the way our allocation process works is they can only spend it there. So maybe they have a letter of agreement, maybe they're paying bonuses, maybe they're paying overtime pay. But that's a big problem, because in the event that they do hire those people, let's say they only have a 10% vacancy rate. Well, that means they're going to come next year and ask me for $150 to $200 million of money I budgeted for them to hire people that they spent on other things and went out and hired people.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. No, exactly. I see what you mean. And I saw some of the justification on the floor. Well, they need that money. For what? There's no employee to fill it. Well, they're using it for overtime. Well, why aren't they coming back to you and saying we need more overtime? Instead of, so that it's categorized correctly, and it's not a empty employee slot, it's overtime. You can justify it. It's a one-time fund. It's not going to, but that's the problem. We've got hundreds of employees, some positions that haven't been filled for a decade, and they're still fighting to keep the money in that position, even though it's not been filled. Am I wrong to say it's essentially a slush fund for these departments to be able to spend on their personnel in whatever way they want?
Well, I wouldn't. So they have restrictions on the fund money. They have to spend them in the allocation line. But the problem is we don't know by department what that looks like. So I'll give you an example. Like an Alaska State Trooper and DPS, they budget around 300 overtime hours a year per trooper. Okay. So that's important for me to know, because now I know how much it actually costs to have a trooper, right? Because this overtime is factored in. Now you can move on to saying, well, is that really necessary or is that not necessary? 300 hours, right? But when you don't know the hours and you don't know the standby rates and you don't know other things, you're paying kind of a shell game with the money, because in the event that they do hire those people, which we have a salary study that we haven't seen yet either, because it's quite clear in a lot of our jobs at the state level, the pay just is not competitive for specialty jobs, especially in the Department of Transportation, right? Where I live in Fairbanks, Fort Wainwright's on my district, and you can pay, they're paying people $27 an hour to work at Fort Wainwright at the Burger King, and that's, equal to or less than like a DOT plow driver, right? So turns out you might actually have to pay someone who drives a big plow truck more than somebody who works at Burger King, right? So when you factor that stuff in, Michael, that deficit gets scarier and scarier just on the top of payroll alone. And then assume you have a change in oil price, or if you look at the stock market and your investment returns drop. So this is the type in life where you need to be very cautious about adding forever liabilities, right? Remember, because of the nature of our baseline budget, one-time money is one-time money, but something that goes into the base, that's forever money.
Right.
And, as Reagan said, the closest thing that I on earth will ever see to eternal life is a government program. So.
Right, exactly. Well, that's where we're at right now, which leads us to the discussion on the other big thing that they'd like to spend on, which is defined benefits. And we'll talk with Will Stapp about that here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Representative Will Stapp from East Fairbanks here is our guest. We're going to be back in just a moment. We'll return. The Michael Duke Show.
listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
Will Stapp is our guest here on the program as well. Brian says $27 an hour. He says, is $27 an hour the cost for that employee? Or, I mean, seriously, is Burger King on post actually paying $27 an hour for their employees?
Yeah, and like I said, I think it actually might be a little higher now, but that was the last time I drove by it. I saw the hiring sign, and I was like, "Oof,
Wow.
maybe I ought to quit the legislature and go work there." You know?
Yeah, no, really. I mean, that's not a bad amount of pay if that's the case. But again, this question that seems to be, there's a lot of avoidance in the legislature, and like you said, kind of financial kabuki theater going on. But nobody seems to be asking the question, how do we pay for all this long-term spending, especially when we've committed to it as a steady. I mean, as of right now, the state budget will go up, what, $150, $175 million a year. If you left nothing alone and the legislature didn't convene and it just said, we're going to let it ride for a couple of years, it's like 150, 175 million a year increase already, right?
Well, it's actually a lot more than that because of hidden liabilities, Michael. So I'll give you another one, right? Right now, we fund Marine Highway System backstop on the operating for about $10 million because at least Senator Murkowski got us a bunch of federal money to operate the ferries. That goes away next year. So guess how much that liability is next year?
I have no idea, but I know you're going to tell.
Closer to $80 million. Okay,
$80 million just for that liability.
Yeah. So like that's a known cost. It's coming. There's no way around it. And you're going to have to pay it. So let's talk about another thing, like all of our, so there are some really good projects we have. For example, we have doing redundancy, a line from Beluga to Homer, where you live, right? To have redundancy in the intertie because of the issues we have, with Bradley Lake Power and et cetera, and having to work on the line. So that's a really good thing. That's a necessary thing to do. The problem with that is that's like $150 million match the state's supposed to provide. And we're matching $1.5 million this year, right? So we have a ton of money to do that project. We're just not forking it over. And we're saying, well, at some point, somebody else is going to have to match that project that we need to fund.
Wow.
But we're only going to do $1 million this year, even though if we just average the match, it's over a 5-year period, we could, do substantially, less. But instead, we're going to shortchange it. And then somebody else is going to have to fork over $60 million a year to get that project done, which, by the way, is absolutely necessary for railbout our power grid or your reliability,
Right. So what do you think the number is closer to? I mean, we've been using the number 150 to 175 million for the last year and a half, 2 years or so. So what do you think the actual number, including liabilities, is probably going to be over the next 2 or 3 years?
Easy $400 million. Easy. Just next year.
Like if we set it and forget it, it'd be $400 million more next year, no matter what.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it depends on how long you can kick that salary study down and stuff. But eventually you got to pay people, right? And if you think about the Marine Highway backstop and fire and stuff like that, it's around $400 million.
And does it look that way for years to come? Is it $400 million every year, or is it between two?
Some of those things will oscillate and change, but like I said, it just depends on when you're going to incorporate those hidden liabilities, right? So maybe you can say we can amortize that hidden cost out for as many years as we can, right? But it'll come due. I mean, he who pays the piper calls the tune, right? Those costs will come. You're going to have to pay them. There's no way around them. But the main thing that voters should ask folks is, when ultimately the conversation shifts to the total elimination of your PFD and new taxes, you got to demand people to tell you where the money goes and what the money actually does. And you got to actually be serious with our budgeting and start to look at where you actually spend the money. So my hope is that as this kind of tidal wave hits us, we'll get into actually starting to zero base some of our RDU components in our budget.
Well, that's a huge deal. The zero-based budgeting versus, the way we've been doing it so far, where we take what we did last year and add to it. That's got to happen some sooner rather than later. And you bring up an interesting point as far as getting more people involved and getting them to understand. That's been a big thing that Ben Carpenter talked about, and Rob Myers has talked about, is this disconnect between the public and the private economy. As long as the private economy, or as long as the public economy is doing great, we don't pay attention to the private economy. Yet every other state in the nation has to pay attention to the private economy because that's their source of revenue, right?
Yeah, and also keep in mind, our private sector is not that robust in this state, right? So when people say the tax word, you can't really squeeze people in the state for a lot of money. There aren't actually a lot of federal income taxpayers in our state, Michael. That's the other thing. And, we don't have that big of an economy to squeeze out a big number out of a sales tax either.
Right. Well, let's pick this up here on the other side before we get into the defined benefits, because I think this is an important point to understand, is that, this is how you want a doom loop. That's how you create a doom loop, is you put a tax on a small cadre of people and then watch them flee to other places. And that causes a problem. So let's get into it here. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Huh. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
Okay, we're continuing now. Representative Will Stapp with us, our guest. One final segment here for this hour. We're going to talk about defined benefits, but during the break here at the very end, I asked Will about this problem that several legislators have talked about, Ben Carpenter, Rob Myers, Mike Shower, et cetera, this disconnect between the public and the private economy. And it seems like a lot of legislators feel like, well, if the public economy is doing great, then that's all that matters, because we're the only state in the nation that doesn't give two rips what's going on in the private economy, because they don't take their revenue from the private economy like every other state in one form or another, whether it's property tax, sales tax, income tax, whatever. They get their money from a different source, and so they don't really care. And Will makes a very valid point, is that our private economy is not that robust. I mean, we were in a recession before COVID, trying to come out of it. We had COVID. Now we're still here. The private economy is still struggling a bit. And if they decide that they need to tax the private economy to pay for government, that you want a doom loop, that's how you get a doom loop. Will?
Yeah, and also keep in mind you have other issues where that are really killing your labor force too. Like people, childcare is like more expensive than college now. So it's really hard to get jobs filled when you can't exercise a strong labor force in your economy. But yeah, the truth is, these taxes, broad-based taxes on the state population, income, and sales, they raise money, but it's substantially less money than we have now. So the thing that I always talk about is, at what point does one person think you have too much money or you spend too much money, right? So the analogy I always give people, if you look at our oil revenues and you look at all of the money we take out of the permanent fund for PFD and for government spending, Michael, that is more money than we would ever raise if we had the highest income tax and the highest sales tax in the country. Okay. So consider that point for a minute, right? So we are already spending more money than we could raise if we had the highest income and the highest sales tax in the country. All right. So, equate that to your own personal life. If you're spending more money than you can possibly make in a year, right? You're probably spending, too much money, right?
Right.
I talk about taxing capacity, right? So really the question is, what are the things that you're actually doing? Are they helping people or not? Are they efficient or not? And when you ask those questions, and always start with the two, where the money is and what the money does, you're going to find a lot of things inside the state budget that don't make a lot of sense. I have a couple of bills. I cut a program out of the budget last year that no one was on. I ran a bill to repeal that program. I have that bill again this year. I have another bill that cuts a program that like 6 to 20 people are on. And my argument for that is if 6 people are on a statewide program, it's not a statewide program. And also when you think about what it costs to administer these programs, right? So I have a bill basically that cuts a thing that says, I'll give you a perfect example. Okay. State has a program. It's called General Relief. Inside General Relief, you have a thing called rent and utility assistance. Okay. So let's just focus on utility assistance. What's that mean? That means the state bureaucrat you're going to go in the DPA office, the state employee is going to vet you. They're going to find your income status. They're going to do asset testing. They're going to see how much money you make. They're going to find out how your landlord is and who your electric utility is. And if you are super poor, i.e. you have less than $400 in assets to your name, the state is going to negotiate a one-time payment of $100 to your utility company, okay? Now, imagine, Michael, how much money it cost me to make a 1 month, one-time payment of $100.
That sounds like that sounds like $1,000 to $2,000 just in time to try and figure all that out just to spend $100.
It's closer to 10,000, right? So now imagine that. Imagine I have a methodology and a system that cost me nearly $1,000 or $10,000 to administer a $100 one-time payment a month for somebody. Okay.
So what you're saying is it's a jobs program. That's what you're saying. I mean, essentially you're not.
But, so keep in mind, these people do a bunch of other stuff. They're supposed to be doing SNAP and they're supposed to be doing Medicaid. But why are they doing this program? And the question is like, look, if you want to give somebody $100 that is about to get evicted and who has no money for a rent or utility payment, isn't there a better way of doing that than like having a one-on-one kind of state chaperone to vet the person and then negotiate a payment plan with the one time with the utility?
Right.
I mean, if you want to give them $100, you could just cut them $1,000 check. Say, here you go. It'd be cheaper.
Yeah, no, it'd be cheap. Well, you could have 100 people come in and just give them all $100
bill.
Let them
first
go.
Comes, first serve. You're about to get evicted. Show up to your nearest DPA office and grab the $1,000 out of the bucket.
It's insane. All right, well, let's talk about the other insanity, which is the other big bill, and this is setting aside the education bill, and that, of course, is the defined benefits. The argument is, oh, well, this will help us with our vacancy rate. This will help us retain employees. This will do all this. But again, based on everything that you've said and you were talking about in the earlier bill, with what does it take for employees and how do we keep them and the employee costs and everything else, and the fact that we don't have a new fiscal note on this bill because we had the old fiscal note which showed that it was. I mean, we're talking about over 10 years. This is $1 billion. This is big money. And we still have a $6-7 billion unfunded liability from the first go around with the defined benefits. What is your take on this defined benefits bill, and what is it actually going to cost us if they decide they want to push this through?
Yeah. So for starters, like I would love to have a great pension. That's on a personal level. I have Social Security a little bit, but I mean, I don't think pensions are inherently bad. I think everybody I've ever talked to, if I could guarantee you 100% of your income for life, everyone would want that. The question is like, why don't we do that? And the answer almost always is money and risk. Okay. So do I think a big state employee pension will help retain employees? Yeah, I would think that. Now, the question is, how do you pay for that and how do you actualize the risk and amortize the costs? So the issue with the pensions and what we do currently is basically who assumes the long-term risk. And let's start by saying, if you are a property tax payer in this state, for a municipality, understand that a larger portion of your property taxes goes to pay employees in your local government who no longer work there than the ones that do. Okay? You need to consider that. So all of our municipal governments, they pay 22% of payroll to PERS for retirement. All right? 12% of that, for the most part, is for people who don't actually work there anymore for an unfunded liability. And 10% is for people who do. Okay? So think about that. Think about you go to work for a job and your employer is paying more for people who retired 10 years ago in their retirement than you're currently accruing in your own retirement. Right. So the first thing that you should probably do in that scenario is you should say, hey, what is my plan to pay off this unfunded liability? Because if I'm working for an employer and they're only giving me, say, a 10% match to my salary, well, if I paid that unfunded liability off, Michael, they could match 22% of my salary. Have you ever worked anywhere where they could match 22% of your salary?
No, I'm lucky if
Me
they can
neither.
match 2% of my salary.
I
Yeah,
mean, that would be that's like a mega good deal. 22%
right,
of your salary is your employer match. That'd be amazing, you know?
right. Well, they don't
So,
have a plan. That's the thing. They haven't articulated a plan on how to clear up the previous liability. And they keep telling us, I mean, we had Cliff Grow on the program when he was running for office saying this would actually save us money. It wouldn't cost us anything. It would
well,
save us money. And I'm like, how do
um,
you know the math doesn't even work out?
yeah, well, here's the thing, right? It's about long-term liability and risk, okay? So again, let's get back to the long-term liability risk. So now we established the underlying thing, which you probably should actually have a plan how to pay off your existing liability. And keep in mind, folks, just so people understand, we have made $7.5 billion in additional contributions to an unfunded liability for pensions, and we still owe another $7.5 billion. And that's on top of what they pay into their current one. That's an insane amount of money. Okay.
And we don't have a new fiscal note as well on this latest version of this.
Well,
Less than 2 minutes, Will. I just
all
want
right,
to let
I'll sum it up as best I can. So understanding the first thing, the second thing is, okay, don't be afraid of a pension bill. Just understand what we are doing. What we are doing is we're trying to determine whether or not the state can assume the risk and long-term liability for that. And the answer to that is probably going to be no. And that's probably what the numbers are going to say. But with the pension bill, all you're trying to do is reverse engineer somebody's wage and how at the end of their life after they retire. So there's just a lot of factors that you got to get right. If you're going to do that, there's a lot of levers that you need to be able to pull if you're going to do that. And I'm not even sure that our state constitution allows us to do some of the things in the bill, but we are going to go ahead and vet it and do the best we can. And there should be really interesting meetings in the finance committee.
Will, I want to commend you for asking the question and being the voice of reason out there, asking the question, how do we pay for all this? It should be the question on everybody's lips. And unfortunately, that's not happening. So keep doing the good work. We'd love to visit with you again here in the near future after we get closer towards the end of the session. Thank you for coming on board and being part of it this morning.
Thank you.
All right, hold the line for just a second, Will. Folks, we got more coming up. Hour 2 dead ahead. State Senator Mike Shower will be joining us. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Back with more right after this. If you got to go, be kind, love one another, live well. Will, I want to give you final bite at the apple, your final thoughts for all the stuff we've talked about today. I mean, where do we go from here? What's your final word here?
Well, I mean, look, what should happen and hopefully will happen is you got to start having the departments within the state government go through their RDU components, i.e. their divisions and stuff like that, and start to zero base their budget. All right. Because I can tell you right now, I am not going to tax the voters of this state until the state departments can demonstrate to me that they are trying to be as efficient as possible with our money. Okay. So, you know, and the question is, and I work here and I have a pretty good idea of what the money does and where the money goes, but I can't tell you that with 100% certainty, Michael. And that's a problem. You understand? Like if I'm in charge of this thing, or I'm one of the people in charge of this thing, and I can't articulate that to you, then they have no right to demand more money from people. That's kind of my opinion. So
right, they've got to be able to explain exactly where the money's going and what it's doing if they want more. Okay, we'll give you more, but just explain what you've been doing with what you got. And if you can't, that's a problem.
Yeah. So, and that's really, I mean, I'm a big keep it simple, stupid person. I mean, that's really the first thing. I mean, explain to me where the money goes and what the money does, and then show me. And if I have questions on something that I think is crazy, then justify it. And until you do that, you know, we're not going to go levy big burdens on the people of the state when they're all struggling to heat their homes and put gas in their car already. You know?
The problem is we got legislators that don't believe in what you're talking about, and we've got a bureaucracy. We've seen what's happened at the national level with Doge. I mean, you know, uncovering some inefficiency and stuff. And the bureaucracies, they don't want to have anything to do with it. So how do we overcome that? here
So
in the state.
the beauty of the problem, Michael, is unlike the federal government, we can't run $2 trillion deficits. So money
Right.
doesn't lie, people do, and ultimately you hit a wall. And you hit a wall because you run out of money. So
Well, we're hoping that we can slow down the train before we hit the wall, right? I mean, that's the whole point. The whole point is to make the impact less.
well,
And unfortunately, it's like a full tilt boogie towards the chasm where the bridge is out.
hey, listen, if you go fast enough, maybe you hit enough airtime and you clear the whole canyon.
You can jump the gap, right? I know that's what I've been saying for years. But I mean, here's some of the legislators just shoveling coal into the box. Oh, we'll make it. Hold my beer. This will be spectacular. Unfortunately, for most of us, we're not going to have any kind of soft landing on this. If it goes bad, it will go bad for a lot of us in the private sector in a bad way.
Yeah, sorry, I lost you for a little bit there. So
yeah, no, I'm just saying if it does, we won't have a soft landing. Most of us won't have a soft landing in this kind of thing. That's the problem.
Well, I am an optimist at the end of the day, Michael. So we'll work hard, it'll work out. And if it doesn't, well,
we'll survive.
Not think about that. So there you go.
Avoidance as a strategy, my favorite. Yeah.
You live a happier life that way.
Exactly. Well, Will, again, I couldn't be in more agreement with you this go around than before. And like I said, in hindsight, a lot of the things that you were talking about and the way you explain them now makes me go, yeah, you were doing the right thing, even when you were trying to cut the PFD, because you were trying to make a point and show these jokers that somebody's got to pay for it. And I think that's an important point that we need to keep bringing up here. And so, I really appreciate the work that you're doing. Keep it up, my friend. Feel free to come back. If you got something else, feel free to shoot me a message. If you've got something going on, I hope that you will reach out to me, and we'll have you back on the program here soon. Okay.
Yep. Thanks, Michael.
Appreciate you coming in, and thank you for being part of it today. Representative Will Stapp, our guest here on the program. Come on, bring me back up. There we go. Yeah, some crazy, crazy stuff going on down there. I mean, these people avoidance as a strategy. Don't worry, it'll be fine. We're too big to fail. It'll be great. Don't worry about it. I do worry about it. I worry about it every moment of every day, that this is what's going to happen, because we can't rein in our appetite for continual spending. It's astonishing. All right, let's see if we can get the master of disaster in here. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, I figured you didn't want to join the video, even though I sent you the link, so I thought I'd call you.
I never do that.
See, I don't know why, because everybody loves it, and except for you. I don't know what the deal is, but it is what it is.
Got to be an outlier somewhere, Michael.
Yeah, got to be an outlier, got to be an outlaw. You ready to get into this and dissect some stuff with us?
Bring it.
Bring it. He says, bring it. All right, State Senator Mike Shower is our guest. We're going to put him back on hold here. Getting ready to do it. Let me go to the chat room real quick to see if there's anything here that we need to hit on. Yeah. Rep Stapp, are you going to introduce more staff members from the gallery? He was trolling Bryce Edgmond so hard. Oh, it was so fun to watch. You should go back and watch that. There's an article in Must Read that's got the video. It's amazing. Anyway, we're gonna continue on here. There is a whole lot of stuff that we're gonna cover this morning with State Senator Mike Shower. So I guess we'll just get to it. We'll get things started. Here we go. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio, the Michael Duke Show. Let's do this thing.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at MichaelDukesShow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Welcome to hour 2 of this beautiful hump day, 32 degrees down here in beautiful on top of the world. Homer here on top of the mountain and just loving it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And we're happy to have you with us here. Hour 2, and it's going to be State Senator Mike Shower joining us here for the Shower Hour of Power. Representative Will Stapp just finished up with us a dynamite. If you'd missed it, you need to go back and listen on the podcast because he was laying some truth bombs out there on us, and it was some good stuff. Little housekeeping tomorrow on the program. School board president from Fairbanks, Melissa Burnett, will be joining us in hour 2. We'll probably have another guest in hour 1, or I'll have some stuff to talk about. On Friday, Dr. John Lott joins us on Firearms Friday, as well as Chris Chang and Willie Waffle. And then on Monday, we will be off the air. I will be gone because I will be in the air flying back from Fairbanks from covering the dog races. So just a housekeeping note, Monday I will not be here, but we'll be back Tuesday for more truth from Brad Keithley. It's gonna be fun stuff. I mean, you're gonna love it. You're gonna love every minute of it. All right, so we're gonna be doing that. But again, just to be aware, that's where we're going, and that's what's happening here in the in the coming days. Meanwhile, let's get over to it. Let's pick things up here. State Senator Mike Shower is our guest, and we need to talk to him about, well, pretty much everything that's going on. He joins us right now. Good morning, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm just hanging out and sunny. No, wait, not sunny. Cloudy. Rainy.
It's Juneau. I mean, what did you expect? I mean,
It's normal. It's always raining here.
Anybody love that anymore? All right. Well, Mike, we got you for the full hour today. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to anything that we just did with Will, but I mean, some great stuff in there. And I guess, I guess I'll start off with a loaded question. Here's the loaded question for you. Mike Shower, Senate Republican minority leader, Republican caucus leader. Does anybody in Juneau outside of the minorities, do they get it? Do they get the fact that, we're out of money? We're kind of busted. I mean, I think Will said we're the richest broke people that out there. We're like the multimillionaire that has 15 houses and doesn't have any money in his account because he's paying for all this stuff that he doesn't really need. I mean, does anybody get it outside of your little cadre there?
Yeah, there are a couple. I mean, I will tell you, there's some that don't, that are worried that where we're headed is obviously, and been heading for some time, right? Because I put out a post on something I think last week, and good old one of the good old blogger Shock Jocks is back again, and he was like, he just found out about this. We've been deficit spending for 10 years. I'm like, well, duh, dude, I've been doing this. I've been talking about it since I got here 8 years ago.
Right.
But way to take it out of context to make your political point there, good old, come on, man.
Yeah.
Seriously?
Well,
so I guess my point is, yes, Michael, some people do see it, that what's happening. And the reason I can say that is because there's a lot of concern when I'm talking to some people behind closed doors about just how much money we have spent, just about the fact that, we had 16, 17 billion in the ERA and 12 billion in the CBR about a decade ago, and both of them are just about empty, pretty close. And so where did that money go? That meant we kicked the can down the road all these years. And now we find ourselves, as of yesterday's numbers with current oil price, before any education spending increase, before defined benefits, before anything else, we find ourselves at about $413 million short of being able to pay the bills without either reducing further, because there's only two sources. You're either further reducing the permanent fund dividend, which some people want to do in the building, and because it's 950 million, roughly 949 for the current PFD, current prices, and or you draw down from the CBR to cover the balance, which means we're getting pretty close to not being able to operate daily because you need a certain amount in that CBR for cash flow in and out every day, pay your bills, money coming in and out, just like your house, right? Like your checkbook, you got to have a certain amount in there to be able to pay your known bills. So there's your two choices. So we are currently, 413 million. You add the education that some people are, projecting. I had a vigorous debate with somebody from Anchorage yesterday that's just randomly stopped by, a parent, not a constituent, talking about how we need $1,000 BSA and it's just the money, and didn't believe a word I said, and we're still cutting and we're cutting and we're cutting. I'm like, really? Cut? We haven't cut $1 from education. The lies, Michael, that continue to be spread by the NEA and by ASD in particular, the Anchorage School District, are just tremendous.
Right.
How much they're telling people that they're cut, but cut what? Anchorage School District has control of the money. All we do is basically send them money. And then they do what they do. They're doing the Washington Monument Syndrome, and they're doing it really well right now. They've got parents convinced. I had a long conversation with a constituent over the weekend about it, that we're cutting all of these things for the state. I'm like, first of all, the state can't cut a thing in ASD. We have no control of what the districts do. And not only have we never not funded up to the BSA every single year ever in the state, and you can ask the old guard about that, they'll tell you. We've been adding last few years 175 million. Before that, we're adding X amount and X amount. So they've been getting extra money as if the BSA has been increased anyways for years. But boy, Michael, the fear mongering that has been used and what the parents and others believe and teachers is just amazing to me. Like, yeah, we're cutting all the spending. We're causing them to cut schools. All the programs are going away. It's been flat funded for years. I'm like, wow. That is how much misinformation is being put out there. And certain days I wonder, where the heck is the press? Where's the press on this? I mean, I hear some good questions now and then, but it's obviously not being written enough that people are seeing it in the press in this state, right? Other than like alternative news like yours, other programs. That's it. So yeah, some people are seeing it. Some people know because the math is just right there. You can't deny the math, Michael. It's crystal clear. I said it last week. I think it was last week in a press conference. I held up a sheet of paper, just math. It's verified by finance co-chair, verified by legislative finance director. This is just math. So we have put ourselves finally right in the point we really truly can't kick the can down the road anymore, because we're at that point. And so what is the conversation from the majorities turn to? Taxes. We've already taxed by taking PFD. Now it's all revenue, right? And I just don't like that word because it makes us sound like a business, right? The government is not a business. The government has to take money from people and businesses and then redistribute it how it sees fit. Some of those are things we all agree with, roads, certain, police. There's things that we've all agreed to. Yes, we need, though. There's plenty that we don't, that some of us don't, right? And it certainly becomes so expensive. And I think last week we had one of the reporters at our press conference asked a question. Well, where can you cut? And I think Senator Kaufman took it and kind of talked about efficiencies and his bill and some other things a little bit. And then the reporter fired right back. Well, you didn't answer my question. I said, well, I'll take that one. So I said, let's just start talking about a few things here. I said, first of all, we had the Sunset Commission, Fiscal Policy Working Group from years ago. The Sunset Commission is empowered with the authority and the charter to start digging into government agencies and directives and go, where do we have things we don't need anymore? Where can we start finding efficiencies? What can we reduce in spending? And then it has to be done, right? And so it drives it in other states, which is why we propose that as a way to save. And when a reporter does that, it's always the emotional response, right? Well, where are you going to cut? Give me right now. I want to know right now where you're going to cut. Tell me exactly what you're going to do. Why don't you go do that? Why don't you go ask the majorities where you can reduce spending? Because all I'm hearing about is more money they want to spend, more bills, more spending, and then we're going to tax to fill the gap, so called, right? And where's the conversation about two things we don't talk about here? Private sector. Where's the focus on the private sector and helping them, because they're the ones we get the tax money from? You grow the private sector, you grow yourself out of this problem we have, right? That's a big part of the solution, if not the master solution. And the other thing we never talk about here is reducing spending. Every once in a while, somebody give lip service to it. When's the last time we really reduced anything? When we had any reductions of spending? And so if we don't enact that, then we're not going to. But I threw out Medicaid. Governor Walker promised us, this is going to save us money. Michael, it's quadrupled. We're hundreds of millions of dollars we spent on Medicaid expansion in this state. The lapsed funds. Last year, I put in an amendment. We found $90 million in lapsed funds that we could have chopped down that $413 million by moving it into this year. Nope, that got shot down. That's just floating around out there for somebody to use. So
how about the unfilled
PCNs?
Positions? Yeah, how about the PCNs? I mean,
the ones we found, about $132 million current numbers we have, and I know some of them are needed, but the point is there's still many PCNs that are funded every year. I even had an administration official not long ago. We were discussing this behind closed doors. Like, well, we all know it's a slush fund. We know it's a slush fund. Why don't we do anything about it?
Right.
And here's my point, Michael. That's not good governance if you're going to continue to fund those things, knowing they're not going to be filled, knowing that agency just gets to use it as a slush fund. Here's the way we should govern. If we know those haven't been filled, pick a number, call it 18 months, 2 years, and it hasn't been filled, you cut it. And if you come back later in the year and go, we need those positions because we need to hire people, you show us the justification as the executive branch in that agency, and then that's what the supplemental is for, to help you come back and hire those people. We have a process for doing this, but the process should not be so broken that we're just going to give you an extra $500 million every year of PCN so you guys can do what you want with it, and we don't have any real accountability. That's not good governance.
Right.
My point is that's other spending that we're just doing every year, and we've accepted as practice when it's not good business practice. So those are things we really need to focus on if we want to help fix the problem. We need to find those reductions and get rid of them, and or force good governance and efficiencies by going, you don't need it. Come back to us when you do need it. We'll give you a supplemental. Let's not have these lapse funds. And Michael, there's I think my chief of staff and I were looking at yesterday. He found, I want to say it was $7.7 billion of unencumbered funds sitting in different accounts in the state. And looking at the capital list line by line, there's hundreds and maybe thousands of lines. It had to be 20 billion. I don't even remember the exact number. It was just it's an incredible number when you start looking at it. And there's a lot of places in there where the money is just sitting and hasn't been used. It just gets reallocated year after year after year. So I will tell you that we definitely need something like the Sunset Commission that has that authority to come in and start looking at these things and cleaning it up, because we're clearly not going to do it. And honestly, it's way bigger than one or two legislators can come in with the resources we have and find this stuff. So it's a daunting task.
State Senator Mike Shower is our guest. We're going to continue with him here in just a moment. I mean, there is so much to talk about this morning, and I can't wait to get into it. Don't forget, you can always join us you could join us here on the program by simply going to facebook.com/Michael Duke Show /live. If you would like to be part of it, we'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Feel free to come on in and be part of it with us here. We're going to continue here in just a second, and we will return with State Senator Mike Shower right here on the Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Back with more right after this.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes,
allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, let's go back to Mr. Shower since we're here. Mike, what's it been like, my friend? What's it been like working with people who have no connection to reality? I guess that's the kindest way I can put it right now. When they don't even, they just no understanding of what's actually happening or what's going to happen if we keep down this road. What's give me a
I can't even say that, Michael, because I think it's not like we're dealing with people that don't necessarily get it or aren't smart enough to get it. I think that's just what they want. That's just where their focus is, right? I mean, everybody here, has a checkbook, has a house they pay for, whatever the normal things of living are. And I think, honestly, at the end of the day, for most people that are supporting this kind of level of spending or these new programs that define benefits, extra school spending, you name the program, right? Whatever it is, broadband assistance, right? I mean, we should have had Starlink on every, house in the state of Alaska in a subscription for less than what it cost us every year, just the state portion of the broadband assistance. We haven't laid a mile of cable yet.
Right.
So billions of dollars, right? So there's all of these things, and it's not that people don't see it. I think honestly, for a lot of things, just ideologically, that's where they are. They just believe that we should be spending that money on government, or that's their constituency, or that's their background, all they've ever done maybe as government. So to them, it's all about the government and the private sector and the public sector, and they don't think about the private sector. There's very few people here that are tied to the private sector anyways, that have jobs in the private sector that see what's happening. So I don't think that it's that they're disconnected from reality necessarily. I think that for many people here, it's just that's what they believe in. They believe the government should be, king. They believe government should be at the top and should have the priority in funding. When you can sit there and know that we've already spent our, all of the extra money that we really have to kick the can down the road, and that we're already in deficit spending today, standing here, and then you sit there at a press conference and say, and we still need to spend more. You either have to have a level of cognitive dissonance in this, or you believe that that's just the right answer. And I don't think people are that disconnected from reality. Maybe there's a couple out of 60 in the building. I don't know. But I think the reality is most of them just believe that's what the right answer. Now, I seriously disagree with that.
Well, but how do they, that's great. They can believe that it's the right thing to do. But there's that thing called arithmetic. Okay, great. You think this is the right thing to do. How do you make it work?
That's my point, Michael. It's still basic math, right? At the end of the day, you have to balance the equation. That's the part that is incredibly frustrating because we missed that window years ago with the fiscal policy working group, right? There are those that, don't want a spending cap. They just say we don't need it. And I think the argument on the other side is like, if we don't have it, then when we have good years and the oil price is high and with, the stock market's booming, so the fund is way up there, we're going to have that extra money. What are we generally going to do with that? We're generally going to spend it. There have been a couple of years where they took money out of the ERA, which I wasn't a fan of, and put it into the corpus. I'm a fan of putting money in and saving it, but we used to do that, right? With the statutory formula, and we just put it away. We didn't spend it. Well, now it's interesting to watch because a lot of people keep saying, well, we've been flat funding, which I heard it yesterday at the majority press conference. One of the folks up there said it. They're like, well, it's been flat funding. Remember, you could almost say it's been negative funding with inflation. If it's been negative funding and the government hasn't grown, things like Medicaid expansion, which they don't even acknowledge happened, then how have we had to take at this point what's probably $20 billion from the ERA and the CBR, and we've had to take more of the dividend year after year after year? If government hasn't grown, then why did we have to do those things? And you know what I don't see? I don't see a single press member asking that question to make them answer.
Yeah, no, they're not. None of them are asking those questions. Well, none of them are asking the hard questions about what do you mean zero increase in education funding because you've had the BSA plus you've had one-time funding on top of that. Nobody's asking that question. They're just buying the narrative. They're just buying the narrative that, it's been flat funded or they've been cuts. Nobody's really that. All right, we're going to go. We're going to jump back into it. Here we go. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Mike Shower is our guest. Let's get back to it. Here we go.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
The Michael Duke Show, proudly splitting the left versus right dichotomy. Yeah, I had to look that word up too. I don't think it means what he thinks it means. Here he is, though. That guy, Michael Dukes, the one with the show.
Okay, State Senator Mike Shower is our guest on the program here. Before we go too far along here, I want to change gears just slightly and talk a little bit about the potential raid on the permanent fund. Mike, there's been this discussion from the Permanent Fund Corporation, from others, including Bert Stedman, et cetera, who've talked about the only way to save the permanent fund in the future is to combine the ERA into the permanent fund and set a draw amount and do all these things. And we've broken down on this show in great detail exactly why that would be a horrific thing, because it would give them access to the corpus of the fund. And it is essentially a raid on the golden goose, on eating our seed corn. And yet we've got legislators in the minority. James Kaufman's got a bill now to combine it. It's slightly different than what they were asking for, but it still causes the problem. And the minority in the Senate seems to be supporting that. What are you thinking? Why is this a good idea in your mind? Give me your thoughts on this.
Well, I'm not convinced yet. Like all things, Michael, I try to keep an open mind and listen to what people have, because you never know when somebody comes along and you go, Eureka, that's a good idea, right? I mean, so there could be merit to some of the ideas. I haven't had a chance to sit down. It's like based on the Permanent Fund Corporation's trustee paper number 10, where they talk about it. And a former commissioner, I think it was Bernie maybe, was talking about that as well, of doing something along those lines. So I guess they're like all things. I said, I have to look more into it, because I still believe, when I go back to, and it was judiciary 4 or 5 years ago, we had a sovereign wealth fund manager, and I believe it was from Norway. And he was, they say one of the biggest ones in the world. And he's done quite a few. And we talked about it. And he actually was not really a fan, because you've heard people say over and over, well, this is the only way to do it. This is what everybody says. This is the only way to make it work. And he was like, percent of market value, not necessarily the best way to handle your fund for what you're using it for. And I remember him very clearly saying that, because we had a 5% draw rate too on it. And he's like, if you have bad years, you're going to actually start drawing the fund down, because you're drawing up to that rate. And he's like, your former formula was brilliant that you had with statutory net income on the permanent fund, because he's like, it went up and down with how things were performing. He's like, if you had good years, you had more. If you had bad years, you had less. And so it followed that along. And dividend might be $500 one year. It could be $3,000, a couple years later. He actually was rather appreciative of how that was working. So it was tied to something, at least, right, with the look back and performance. I remember that very clearly. So have never been a fan of the path we have been on, because it feels like, one, many people want to get rid of the dividend, period. So what we have done is we have destroyed the link, right, of the permanent fund to the people, our resources, right? Our resource gets extracted. We get royalties and taxes. We've taken a portion of that for many decades. We send it to the stock market. That grows. We get money back, statutory net income before with the formula. And then some would go to the government, which usually was put into savings for a long time, not anymore. And then the rest would go to the people. And then that was the direct tie of our resources, right? Jay Hammond's, what did he call it? The circle, I forget the name, but it's the circle of protection, right? People would get angry if we touched it. So we've now destroyed that back in 2017 by calling it a designated fund. It no longer is a pass through. Now we get our hands on it. So now you put all the money in one pot, right? And then we decide, well, this is how much we're going to give. And now what that did, right, low hanging fruit, was like, well, we can just take a little more this year. I know we're a couple $100 million short. We'll just take that and whatever's left for the dividend, it is what it is. And that's been the big battle, right? So now taking the ERA completely away, which what we were using with the interest before for the dividend, we've completely disconnected the dividend from what it was intended, right? Because the dividend is just like having stocks in Exxon. They have a good year, they pass out dividends, you get a check, right? That's what we were getting from the stock market. Some people, I've heard them over and over again, just continue to hate the dividend, hate this so much. Well, it's socialism. I'm like, really? Putting your money from your resources into the stock market and getting a dividend for it is socialism? Wow, I didn't know that. I guess I got to go back to college and do economics 101. I'm a little confused, I suppose. I thought capitalism was having the stock market, work for you and giving you earnings on the money you gave them to invest it. Oof, I'm going to have to redefine that. Socialism, however, is when you start basically taking money from people to hand out a check. That's UBI, entitlements, basic income, right? Now you're a real socialism because you're taking from one and giving to another. And because we've destroyed that tie between them, it's very concerning for me because this has become a thing of, yeah, we're going to give out a dividend check, but we're going to start increasing taxes because we've spent so much money we can't afford it anymore. And we have to pretty much take it all. But we're going to give you a little dividend check over here just to kind of wink, wink, keep the program alive. That's, to me, that's what concerns me, is the path we're on. And there's a lot of different arguments about how we do that, et cetera, and the taxes we raise and still giving out a dividend. I know there's a lot of debates and discussion.
I know I know you're saying you're going to have to look into it, but I mean, I think just a cursory glance could make you, could make people understand that if we combine the earnings reserve and the corpus of the fund and remove that constitutional protection just by saying, okay, it's going to be a 5, even if we use Kaufman's bill, which actually places the 5% into the Constitution versus having it as a statutory number, which is what the other proposal is. We realize that if we have a bad year and there's not enough money in the earnings reserve to cover that 5% draw, then it will come from the corpus. It will come from what was originally the corpus, the seed corn of the fund. And if that happens year after year, pretty soon we're eroding the earning potential and earning power of the fund. And it is a raid on, that's what's going to happen. And so
that's why I brought up the Norway fund manager who said that the danger of it.
Yeah, because it makes no sense to support something like this when what we have had in the past has worked and the changes that we've wrought now are what's causing the problem. We should be looking to go back in the other direction.
I don't disagree with that, Michael. It's back to the same thing. It's like we have already destroyed that mechanism. We've completely turned that upside down here. The legislature has gotten its hands on that money. And if you think this legislature is ever going to let go of money it's got its hands on, what was the first segment spent talking about? The fact that we're already in deficit spending and there's people in this building full throttle ahead, let's spend more. So if that's the path we're on, how are we possibly going to go backwards to a time when this state actually lived within its means, didn't touch the statutory formula with the PFD, which acted as its own quasi-spending cap, enacted different bills over the years that have just changed the structure on taxes over and over again on our biggest industry, oil and gas, right? Whipping them around. Now we're back to that again, right? We're doing that right now, talking about there's multiple taxes on the table. There's the, what I know some are calling the Hill Corp tax. There's the per barrel credit change on the table from Wilikowski, I think it is now. And maybe he had two, or the Senate majority had two. I don't remember who talking, but they talked about the press conference yesterday, and the internet tax. And I sat there and listened to one of them actually say this. Well, the internet tax could get us up to about $60 million a year or something in that ballpark, but it's not going to raise taxes on Alaskan businesses or Alaskans. I'm like, what? I'm like, how could you say that?
Who do you think pays those? Who do you think pays those taxes? I mean, is it some kind of mythical buffalo that pays the taxes somewhere else?
If it costs that company more to do business in Alaska, you know what they're going to do? They're going to raise the cost of the product and pass that along to us. When people say that, the press just laps it up. I'm looking at the press from the back of the room going, guys, seriously? One of you isn't going to ask the most obvious question? Well, isn't the cost increase of those taxes that producer has to live with going to be passed on to the consumer? That's the way it always works, Michael. When people go, taxes are free, it's not going to cost less. What? Of course it is. It's like the renter, right? when the owner of the house, they go, get the rich guy that owns the house. We're going to increase his property taxes. So there's more money coming to me somehow. I don't know how, but somehow. You think that the property owner is not going to just increase the rent at the next contract, year, whatever it is, so that doesn't get taken out of his pocket? That's what they do. If I was in that boat, that's what I would just say. Well, government wants to take more money from me. I'm going to pass it along to the people paying the bill. I'm not going to do it out of the goodness of my heart. I'm a business. I got to survive. I have to make money, right? It's like people think that businesses are these magic little things out there where they can have all the money they ever need, and they're just greedy, right? I'm like, no, they have to survive. And a lot of these people and businesses are operating on very thin margins to survive. We saw that in COVID. How many did we lose? Hundreds of businesses went away forever because they couldn't survive it. Big businesses had money. They came out flush, right? Because big businesses were propped up by government and they scooped up all the business, right? So do you think for 1 second that taxes are not going to increase the price to us? If we tax anything, Michael, you're going to, somebody's got to pay that bill.
Yeah, that's going to be passed through to somebody. Somebody's got to pay it. It just doesn't magically appear out of thin air. Oh, look, we taxed somebody and nobody got hurt. Somebody's gonna feel it.
Yeah. So back to answer your original question, I don't know what I think the best answer is to go back the way we're doing business, 10, 12 years ago and not completely turn the apple cart upside down. However, it's pretty clear to me looking at this building and the personalities and the numbers that that's not going to happen. And unless all of a sudden you elect some super majority of Republicans that, want to go back to the way we were doing it and are willing to reduce the cost of government and take the heat for that, because it's going to bring a lot of heat. I don't see how we get there. So I don't mind people looking for solutions because I think that's important, right? How do we solve this problem? Are there ways to protect the fund? Are there ways to make sure we don't overspend? Are there ways to find the authority to reduce the cost of government, like Doge, right? But Doge with teeth, having Doge appear is great, but it has no authority to do anything. It doesn't really mean much. It just kind of highlights it for people to see. You have to have the ability to go in and go, that program goes away. That program's been around for 30 years. Nobody, those PCNs haven't been filled for 5 years. They go, you got to have the authority to do that, to start chopping away, right? Because 5 million here, 10 million there, after you do that for all, as the saying goes, that starts to add up to real money. So I don't mind looking at different ideas, Michael, because we're so far down this path of how to save it. Like the idea of the 75-25. We had a 50-50 in the fiscal policy working group. I could live with that. Wasn't perfect, but that was probably the best we were going to do based on the numbers in the building. You're just trying to save it, right? Well, we blew past that window. Now we're at a 75-25. That bill's out there. And I don't really like that, but I understand why there are a few people that are looking at it going, well, maybe that's what we're going to do. Because if we don't do that here, I predict within 2, 3, 4 years, based on the numbers, the PFD is essentially gone. We will have taken every.
No,
because frankly, even today, if it's $950 million and we add, $175-200 million of education spending, we're over $600 million short.
Well, I mean,
if they don't want to draw from the CBR, that comes from that PFD, brother, and it goes from $1,400 to about $400 or $500.
Well,
today,
I'll be honest with you. I will be surprised if there's a PFD next year. I at this point, based on what we're seeing and based on where everything's going, I will be wholeheartedly surprised if we have the ability to file for a PFD next year. They'll basically just tell us don't bother.
If the price of oil drops out with where it currently sits, which I predict is going to happen because the Saudis, OPEC, have increased it because they see with Trump in office what he's going to do. He's going to turn his fracking and energy production pipelines, all that stuff. So America is going to turn around with a resurgence of energy dominance, which means there's going to be more oil and products on the market. Which guess what? That means the price drops. That ain't good for Alaska. So the chances are, I think, we see the price of oil dropping. And if that happens, which is still a third of the state's, taxes for the year that it gets for income to spend, if that number drops even $10, we're in big trouble, obviously.
No, I mean,
we're in deficit spending now at $72 a barrel, roughly. Imagine if it goes to 62 or 60 or 58.
Yeah, well,
I don't know what we do.
For every 10, it's over $400 million, right? That's what Will Stapp just told us. So there you go.
That's my point. So you go $10 down and see where we are. We're $1 billion short just today standing here.
Mike Shower is our guest. We're going to continue here in a moment. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, we are in the break right now. Mike Shower is our guest. Mike just actually posted lots of vacant PCNs in the executive side as of January 15th. 917 vacant positions across all departments, worth over $124 million already appropriated for this year. A few will be filled, but a lot will stay unfunded. It will be interesting which departments and how much will be used in other places. I mean, this has been a bone of contention with us for a long time, Mike, this unfilled positions. But
it's one of several areas that without the authority for an organization like a Sunset Commission, and I'm going to keep saying it, something like that, to go in and find that's empowered with the authority, right, and the teeth to go in and make that and go, here's what's going to happen, and you have until the end of this year or whatever for it to happen, or it just goes away. So that's how you're going to do that. You're not just going to get it. You try to get through the legislature, good luck. I've been talking about it. I put in amendments for it. I get shot down every time. I don't think I've ever had one reduction to spending ever approved in a subcommittee in finance or on the floor, which tells you that the task that is before us is monumental trying to do it.
Right.
So my point is that this isn't gloom and doom. This is just reality of dealing inside the building.
Well, no,
you have too many people that don't want to reduce spending. You just do.
It's not gloom and doom. It's that we have to face reality. And a real clarification. That was Naresh said, oops, he was supposed to be posting that. He was supposed to be posting that under his profile. That was Naresh that posted that about the vacant PCNs. But it still holds true. Doesn't matter. Mike, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I'm going to come back to it again because that press release on the permanent fund combination, it made it look like all the minority members were 100% in favor of it, is what the press release looked like. Now, I'm all for talking about ideas, but again, I've already pointed out the huge flaw in that plan of combining the ERA and the corpus. I mean, is this something that there is support for or not? Because to me, this is a slippery slope. That is the danger zone right there.
I don't feel like there is look, first of all, every group, majority, minority, doesn't matter. Nobody in there agrees on everything. I mean, that just doesn't happen, right? I mean, that's fine. There's 60 people, there's 60 opinions, and line up on some things, oppose others, and you get some strange bedfellows too, right? You might have a couple Democrats line up with a couple Republicans on an issue. You see that where they vote certain ways, and sometimes you look at the board and go, "Wow, I didn't see that coming." So people have their reasons, right? So that's fine. It's just human nature. That's what we're doing, a human endeavor. But you're never going to have agreement. So when somebody says, does your caucus all agree because of what you said? I'm going to come right back and say, I don't know. Probably not. We haven't specifically sat down and discussed that one topic or the things around this yet. There's too many other things that are moving. Education spending has sucked the oxygen out of the room most of the first part of the session. I've been spending tons of time on a bipartisan election bill again. That's where most of my focus has been. This other stuff has mostly been bouncing around in different committees or in finance. And I'm not on any of the committees that have seen them. So for me personally, I haven't, frankly, between my minority leader duties, which is part of why I don't see you guys every week, and the two big things over there that I'm working on that are sucking the oxygen out of the room for me and a lot of the building, there just hasn't been time to work on it. I don't think there's agreement on a lot of things in every caucus. And we haven't, said, so to say that the whole caucus would support it, I simply don't know. Because that's not something we've sat down and say, hey, let's have a caucus meeting and talk about.
But you can see how the letter that came out, makes it look like you guys are in support of that, right? I mean, I think that was the bone of contention.
Well, don't take anything at face value that way. My response to that would be, one, our caucus hasn't sat down and talked about that specifically and had a position on it. So that's one thing. Two, the way things are written sometimes is trying to be very positive, right? And we're looking at these things, and this caucus member has that bill and this thing, and trying to be very positive and show people what we're working on or what the ideas are. So that's another thing. They're always written that way out of it. So I would never assume, and this is for you and the audience, I would never assume when somebody's a member of a caucus that they agree with what a press release says or what a press conference says or what somebody says in that conference, because the chances are there's going to be disagreement on those certain things. I mean, Senator Yunt has the big tax bill, right? The loophole clause, whatever they're going to call it. Well, there's not agreement in our, caucus over that. I can tell you, because it's come up multiple times. So the point is, never assume that everybody agrees, because there's no requirement to agree on everything. But you're also careful about putting out disagreements, right? I mean, the last thing you want to do is, if your caucus has big disagreements, is highlight that for the world to see, right? Somebody would try to use that as a pressure point. So I'm just here to tell you, in response to that I'll look at it as time comes. I don't know how far along it even is in the process. I haven't gotten to that point. So if it's not percolated to the top of the radar like that, where we're talking about it, it hasn't gone too far yet. And last point before we go off the break, I don't think the governor supports it. And if the governor vetoes it, this is the kind of thing where, do you have the political capital to call a joint session? And how many things you're going to try to override?
Right.
I don't see that.
It's good news, because again, it's been my fear for 25 years. This was the first topic that I brought up when I started my show, was a raid on the permanent fund. And it makes me worried. I'll be honest with you. It's one of the things that I worry about at night.
You should be, Michael. We're clearly moving in that direction.
The Michael Duke Show. Seriously humorous with a pinch of intellect. Sorry. That is humorous. Here's Michael Dukes.
Okay, we're back. State Senator Mike Shower. Man, we're into the final segment already. How did we... Just the time.
It always happens that way.
Time just flies. But a bit of busy show today. All right, Mike. So we've covered a lot today. Between you and Will Stapp, we've covered a lot of things. But here's what's on the horizon for us: the education funding bill. It's going to have to go to the Senate, right? Defined benefits.
Our way.
Yeah. The defined benefits bill. We know there's senators already that are trying to push that hard. We know there's been discussions in the House as well. Those are two of the biggest bills. And of course, now we've got this whole conversation going on about Medicaid funding and healthcare funding that the state may be on the hook for, millions of dollars. So what do you think the reception's, what do you think is going to happen with the education bill when it hits the Senate? What is your feel on how the majority, because I know the majority in the Senate's not a fan of the big one that they talk. Well, some of them are, but the majority overall seems to be reticent. But give me a rundown here. What do you think is going to happen with each of these bills here in the next couple weeks as we go through?
I'm not sure defined benefits makes it, because I don't think, and again, I'm being very broad in my terms. I don't think the Senate Minority Caucus, which is obviously only 6 out of 20, supports that. I don't think it has pure support in the Senate Majority Coalition either. I think they probably have the votes to pass it. Passing that in the House is going to be a much tighter margin, because obviously the House is almost evenly divided between the two caucuses. So much bigger problem, because when you got a majority of one, that's a real tough thing. One person bails on you, doesn't like it, it fails, right? So, but here's the key. I know that the governor is not a fan. And so, again, I go back to what I was saying at the end of the break. If the governor vetoes something, doesn't like it, you better have a lot of horsepower and votes in the books, right? Votes in your pocket to be able to call a joint session and try to override his veto, because you got to get 2/3. And reaching 40 on an issue like this, when you shove it down somebody's throat, probably not going to go well. And then it looks really, really bad if you pull all of that political capital and then lose the battle on the floor by not getting your votes. So I could see, if the education spending, to answer your two questions, I don't think defined benefits makes it in its current form. We could do some tweaks to the retirement system, the DC plan, some different things. We could change some stuff. Stedman's got a good bill or two about it. I've sat down and talked to him of tweaking the system, making it a little better, but not taking that huge leap backwards to defined benefits. So I don't think it survives in its current form or at all. That's just my guess. We'll see, but I don't think so. The other thing is, on the education, it's a pipe dream if you want $1,000. We're already in deficit spending. You want to add another $250 million to that? You want to be $2/3 of $1 billion in deficit in a state? It just doesn't pass the common sense test. So the number I keep hearing that seems pretty consistent is the Senate could live with, and I say that very pejoratively, like, we can live with, don't like it, but we could live with 680 of a BSA, which is 175 million. And I hear bantied around kind of in the building that's kind of a number that's probably the one that would survive the process. However, I will add to that, a lot of us in both minorities, and maybe a handful, some in the majorities, if there's not policy that is tied to that spending, that 680, things like CTE and other policies, if that doesn't come along, then the answer is going to be no. The governor will likely veto that. And so it's not as simple as just, oh, well, it's going to be a 680 and get voted on, whatever. The negotiations have been very centered on there has to be a certain amount of policy that comes with that, like we did years ago, the Read by 9, things other states have done that we know actually will improve performance, not just money. That's clearly not the answer by itself. So that's the balance too, right? 680 as a number, but what policy is in there? If there's not enough policy, the governor's been, just slapped down year after year like this, right? So he'll probably veto it. And there will be a number of us in the building on different sides that will go, we want to see policy too. We've accepted that there will be some BSA increase just to get it off the table, right? Because we've been doing it year after year anyways, but let's get policy that's going to improve performance and metrics, right, and accountability. Then we could live with some BSA increase. That's kind of where it's all centered on right now. What that final form takes, I don't know, because there is no final form in negotiations. Senator Cronk, retired teacher, is keeping us updated on it, but as of yesterday, there just isn't a final package, if you will, or knowing exactly what it would be that's in there. But we'll see. I honestly don't know, right? You think it's simple, it ends up being complicated. You think it's easy, it's going to happen, it doesn't. So it's hard to tell here because you never know what tomorrow may bring. So, but that's kind of where it's centered on to answer your two questions right now. So we'll see. Something will probably happen by the end of this session, but I don't know. I don't know what. I think there was an amendment passed in the one in the House yesterday that I really don't like, and it said, what was I told last night? That it said that education funding had to be determined by March 15th. And I go, so you just made education funding more important than everything else in the state, all the other budgets and things happening. I'm like, what is that? I mean, I don't even know how that can be constitutional because they wanted to forward fund a few years ago. And I put an amendment in to strip that out. I go, that's not constitutional. You can't why don't we just forward fund the whole budget, call it a 2-year budget cycle and be done? Oh, we don't want to do that. Of course we don't. So let's only have a 1 year session and it counts for 2 years. And boy, people didn't like that answer.
Yeah.
But anyways.
Well, and let's talk briefly because we got about 5 minutes here. Because we're already seeing I'm seeing the next tact is going to be about this healthcare funding, because we're talking about DOGE and the lack of federal funds and the fact that the Medicaid expansion won't be paid for anymore and everything else. And we're already seeing the rumblings from some in the Democratic majorities talking about how, well, we're going to be on the hook for that. The state's going to be no talk about cutting out the excess programs and things that we can't afford. I mean, that's tens of millions of dollars if the federal funding dries up for that or they stop paying for it, which we warned about on this program, that those are always short-term payments that within usually 10 years, it's all on you, the state, to do it. What are you seeing there? What's your prediction with what happens there?
Well, I mean, look, Michael, there's a point at which we're going to break ourselves, right? I mean, if you want to see austerity measures come into the state, the path we're on is going to put us here, whether they like it or not. Sooner or later, you're going to run out of money, right? I mean, unless we get down the road, you start talking like 2029, 2034, nearly 10 years from now, when all of the different oil projects come online where the state starts getting royalties and taxes, you'll have some more money available to do that. In the meantime, you don't, without drawing down savings, right? Increasing taxes significantly, that for every lever you pull. I had a person from Anchorage that moved here from the East Coast, just randomly stopped by yesterday arguing. We had a very terse discussion about education spending. It's like, we just need to spend more, then we just need to pay taxes. And we just didn't go back to the East Coast. I mean, that's not what we're looking for here. So yes, there is some, we've talked about the program. There's some tie between people not being taxed and how much their government spends. If they're not taxed, they really don't seem to care. So there is some argument, Ben Carpenter, and I know he's talked about the program, would say that, a tax that comes directly out of your wallet, which some people would say is the PFD tax, right? And I mean, it's not quite the same, but the argument is philosophically that if you're tied to government spending, you tend to get angry when it spends more because they come for your wallet. That's kind of happened with the PFD, right? Imagine it with an income tax or sales tax or whatever else. So there's some argument to be made about how they're tied there. But when you don't have to worry about that spending, you don't care what the government spends. It doesn't matter to you until it affects you personally. That's unfortunately how we tend to react as a species. But that being said, we know that the healthcare thing's coming. I think it was Senator. Anyways, there was a thing read on the floor last week about the Medicaid. I think it was a New York Times article that the only way the money can come from is cuts to Medicaid. And that was going to hit us. And there's hundreds of thousands of Alaska on it, 180,000 or something like that. I forget the number.
270,000, one third of Alaskans.
Yeah. So I went back and read the rest of the article because it didn't tell the whole story from the New York Times. And what it said was it may only come, not would, it may only come from Medicare. And I went on to read the rest of the article that had about 9 different recommendations that they could use, including things like changing EPA limits and a bunch of other stuff that would save hundreds of billions of dollars to reach their $880 billion in cuts that wouldn't come from Medicaid. So first of all, we're back to fear mongering, telling everybody's going to get kicked off Medicaid. They're not going to get it. They're not going to be able to afford it, when that's not what the article said that was driving some of this fear, right? So we're not sending a clear message to people. We're scaring them when we don't need to, because we don't know how it's going to end up. And I talked to both two of the federal delegation officers and asked them, no, we're just getting started. We don't know how this is going to play. Nobody can say that yet, but that's what people are saying, right? But there's things that you can do, like clearly listed there, that wouldn't necessarily affect Medicaid at all for people that are on it. And what about things like work rules? So I watched Speaker Mike Johnson, and that was the last thing I said in my special order last Wednesday, I think it was, or Tuesday, Monday, whatever day it was. And I said, look, Speaker Johnson last night on CNN said clearly the 29-year-old lady, single mother of 2 kids, is not going to get kicked off the program. That's not what we're trying to do. But the 29-year-old guy that's sitting on his parents' couch playing video games that could go to work and isn't, that's who we're after. Because, and Nick Baggett said it in his speech up here to the joint session. The point is, Michael, there's a lot of places that we should be looking for those reductions to spending in able-bodied workers and other things that people won't touch.
Right.
Because they seem to want them on the government dole because that's a lot more control.
All right.
It's much more complicated than that.
Less than 60 seconds. Give me your thoughts.
Didn't we just do that for the last 50
minutes? No. Just final thoughts for this week before we go.
All right. So keep your eyes open, folks. The debate is far from over. I think it's going to be interesting to see what we do with education spending, if anything happens with defined benefits. I was hopeful, but I'm less so now on an election bill coming through that has some cleanup stuff on it. And that's about where we are. I think the battle is really going to be about, honestly, what we can afford to spend as a state, because we're in deficit spending. I don't know where that goes. So watch 2 things. Watch if we reduce the dividend further or we take a draw from the CBR. That's where we are. That will start to come out in the next couple of weeks. That's our big thing until you and I talk again.
Okay. All right. Well, State Senator Mike Shower, hold the line. Thank you so much for coming on board. Folks, we're out of time. Again, reminder, on Monday, I will be off the air because I'll be traveling back from Fairbanks. Tomorrow, Melissa Burnett. Friday, Dr. John Lott, Chris Chang, Willie Waffle. Be kind. Love one another. Live well. We'll see you tomorrow. All right, because I know you hate to be restrained and bridled, I'll let you run free for the last 2 minutes here on anything else you got going on.
Well, you should have fun with Lott. He's got so much information. That's always an interesting character to listen to.
Oh, he's great. He's a little dry sometimes, but he's got so much info. It's like a brain dump. It's just fascinating to listen to.
It's full of data for sure. So, I don't know, Michael. Like I said, I am worried about where we're headed. The lady I talked to yesterday about education spending, it's like, I don't care, right? Like, I'm completely disconnected from the system. Like, do you realize that my kids went through it and my grandkids are in it? And I've got a grandkid on the way, in the oven, so to speak, and they're going to be in this system in one form or another. How do you think that I don't care, right? It's like we get ignored here sometimes, and the press continually misquotes things that are happening, or what we say, or don't ask the right hard questions that they need to. So it gets frustrating.
Right. Let's not let the facts get in the way of your feelings, essentially, when it comes down to it.
Yeah. And I go back to, in a lot of ways, this is just a math problem, Michael. The government and the state cannot print money. And we're at a point where we are spending more money for years now, right? Because this is back to the blogger again, said, oh, you just figured that out. I'm like, come on, man. Grow up, be an adult here. We've been talking about this for years, and as part of the fiscal policy working group, but we've reached that point. We've been, you and I and your listeners have been saying for years, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. We're going to hit that brick wall. Well, guess what? We pretty much hit it now.
Right.
We don't have anything else to kick. kick the can down the road. So now what are we going to do to solve the problem?
Right.
We don't have a choice anymore.
Let me, I'm sorry, somebody just asked me a question and I meant to ask you about this earlier. What about House Bill 89, Josephson's red flag law? Is this thing going to move, or is this just him throwing me to the base? I mean, because it feels like he's just going through the motions.
It's just more of that garbage. I mean, come on, an ex parte law to take away your Second Amendment right and your firearms because some jilted lover didn't like you anymore, or you broke up with somebody and they're just going to make a false call to the police. Anybody remember Mary Fulp, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't a red flag law, but a few years ago, they put her into the psychiatric ward, gave her psychedelic drugs, stripped her down naked for 3 days and held her against her will because her family members forged the signature of a judge. What do you think is going to happen with the red flag law? And by the way, once the government takes your guns, can you imagine what it's going to take to get them back? Michael, that's beyond the pale. To even consider a bill like this in a state like Alaska, that should be a death knell for his political career up here.
Right.
If you touch that kind of stuff. So no, absolutely, Mike, there are some hills, I'm not going to die on that hill.
Right.
There's other hills worth dying on. Biological boys getting to destroy women's sports, that's a hill to die on. Allowing ex parte rules from people to just come in and make nefarious claims and take away your Second Amendment right, that's a hill to die on, right?
Right.
The future of our kids and grandkids, spending more than we have and not setting up something that's going to be fiscally balanced over the, in the future, that's a hill to die on. There are places where we should plant the flag and go, that's worth the fight. There are others that are not.
Right.
But some of these crazy left-wing ideas that belong in San Francisco or New York City do not belong in Alaska. That's why I believe in a federated system. I like Trump's approach that goes, these things need to go back to the states. What works in California does not work in Alaska, and quit trying to make it. Just stop. So, pick your fights, but pick them wisely. But there are fights worth fighting, Michael, and we need to.
All right. Well, thank you, my friend. Appreciate you coming on board. And hopefully we didn't get you too fired up today. So we must be doing something right. Appreciate you sharing with us. Good luck, and I guess we'll touch base again in a couple weeks, maybe, or so, whenever you can make some time.
No less than about every 3 weeks. So trying to get back in the program. I just have to work the schedule around all the other meetings to make it work in the morning. But we'll get back on. Like I said, every few weeks I'll be back, and we'll try to make sure we got at least one person a week talking to you from the minority. So we're kind of getting updates, spreading the love around.
Yeah,
no,
it's been
we'll stay on.
It's been nice to talk to some of these other legislators, and we appreciate your work on that as well. So thank you. Mike Shower, appreciate it. Appreciate you calling in. All right, folks, we're out of time. We will see you tomorrow with Melissa Burnett and maybe somebody else. Like I said, be kind, love one another, live well. The Michael Duke Show. We'll see you then.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.
Well,